Hello, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this important discussion this morning. I'm really excited to learn and listen from our panelists and take some time to be able to explore knitting equity into the grain chain. Helping to guide the conversation is a great friend of the Maine Grain Alliance, somebody who is a champion of local flour and the local flour movement, regional grain economies, very talented author and a good friend, Amy Halloran. And I want to just pass it over to Amy, and she can help to set sort of what the discussion is, how the discussion is going to flow. I know that in a lot of our workshops, we've been offering to have folks to leave comments in the chat. And also, we try to leave a little bit of time and space so that we can share with our actual voices in this virtual world we're living in. So we'll try to do that, and I can help to pose some of those questions too that are in the chat. Or Amy, if you see the chat function on your screen, you can do that too, obviously. So I've been saying without further ado, I was just making a joke. I've said that so many times. I need a better transition. So how about my friend, Amy Halloran?
Oh, how about it? How about it? I had pancakes for both of us this morning, Tristan, to really fuel up for this conversation. I've been having this conversation with myself for quite a long time. I used to run a soup kitchen and food pantry, and I did that for 6 years. And for that entire time, I knew that the interest that I had in specialty grains and hunger relief programs shared more than me. I'm not the only bridge between this. It's not just like I like knitting and I like banjo playing. There's something in common with all of these. And unfortunately, the pandemic is the thing that drove it home and made the rest of the world see that we really need to value all parts of our food system and all eaters. So I have assembled for us today a really great panel of practitioners I admire deeply, who are all working in this project of securing the entire grain chain. With us today are Fresh Roberson, my colleague at the Artisan Grain Collaborative. I work with two grain organizations. One is in the Midwest, that's the Artisan Grain Collaborative, and one is in the Northeast, the Northeast Grain Shed Alliance, and both of them are networks that are trying to support the many pieces and parts of these novelty grain systems. They're about teenagers now, these regional grain chains that are happening. So Fresh is a farmer and a chef and an amazing change agent, as everyone on this panel is today. She's with Fresher Together and the Chicago Bread Club. So I'm so excited, Fresh, that you're joining us. Another colleague of mine is Eric Shedler from Muddy Fork Farm and Bakery. Fresh is in Chicago. I don't know if I said that. Eric is in Bloomington, and I'm going to really be an embarrassing East Coaster. I'm not even going to say the state. It begins with an I. Okay, so
Indiana.
I didn't want to say Bloomington, Illinois, but anyway, thanks, Eric. And Eric was one of the first Neighbor Loaves practitioners in our network of AGC bakers. We established that, and Eric is going to talk all about that. And then we have Kate Galassi, who's just a little bit downstate from me in New York with the fabulous and mispronounceable Sfaglini pasta. I'm such a fan of all the work that you were able to do for using New York State flour and getting fabulous food into emergency feeding system. Silas Conroy, great facilitator of this work, is here from Headwater Food Hub, which is really showing a new model of how how food access can happen and facilitating a lot of relationships across the supply chain. And then we have Catherine Curley from Community Loaves out in the West Coast and spreading. That is similar to Neighbor Loaves, and it's a way that Neighbor Loaves and Community Loaves is a way to get local and regional flour into food pantries. And one is done by Community Loaves is home bakers, Neighbor Loaves is professional bakers, bakeries, and both of them are really great models. A little later on, we will be joined by Mark McMullen and Jessica Brooks from New York State, who work with the Nourish New York program, which I'm so excited that they're here to join us and explain how we can help financially secure this kind of work and connect everyone to access across the grain chain. So the way we've envisioned this conversation is to have have each of these leaders talk about the work they've done. Should I call you guys leaders? Leaders is so hierarchical, and we are all fairly anti-hierarchical in our work. So I don't know how to say it. These people that I'm fans of, each of these people that I am a fan of is going to describe their work and their project and help understand what they're doing to knit equity into the grain chain and how help us imagine other places that these kind of relationships can and should happen. And then we're going to have, as I said, the New York State Nourish New York people come and describe that project for a little bit. And we're going to have lots of time for brainstorming and questions, because I really want this to be an opportunity to carry these models that are being described and demonstrated into their own communities. This is a lot of us at the Kneading Conference are here because we love the community part of bread. And it really takes a lot of work to make sure that all communities have access to great bread and pasta and beans, which are a grain in some strange categorization. So thank you all attendees for your interest in this. And how about we start with Fresh? Are you ready to kick us off?
I had a feeling you were going to start with me. Sure. So right now, am I talking about the work that I do?
Yes. Fresh is going to tell us about all your food access work, and especially then the community grain shares and how you've been managing to get stuff on mobile markets and all of that. Thanks, Fresh.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. When Amy invites me to things that are related to grain, I always have to know specifically what I'm talking about, because I wear so many hats and dabble in so many things. I'm like, okay, which thing do you want me to talk about? But one of the things that I love doing and that I'm up to now is trying to figure out this model of community grain shares. And we did I started this work during the pandemic, trying to figure out how to get more access to people, for people in my neighborhood, on my side of town here in Chicago, to local grain, and how to support local grain farmers, and kind of what that would look like. And so where I live in Chicago is on the south side of the city. And if you know much about Chicago, one of the things to know is that we are a pretty segregated city. And so most of the Black and brown folks either live on the south side or the west side. Of course, there's kind of a mix of people all over, but if you kind of did a mapping, predominantly the South and the West Side are where Black and brown folks mostly live, or that area has mostly Black and brown folks, I should say. And so what that often looks like is our communities experience food apartheid. Some people refer to as like food deserts, where the access to food is often limited. The availability of grocery stores sometimes is pretty sparse. And I don't know where I would locate local grain on my side of town. Like, I know I can go downtown to like maybe some Whole Foods or go to some markets and find local grain, but otherwise I wouldn't know where to get local grain in my neighborhood. And so one of the things I wanted to do was figure out how to get local grain in my neighborhood, how to get people more access to local grain, and not only for folks who could afford to pay for it, but also them too, but also for emergency feeding programs and folks who were really looking for quality, nourishing food to eat. And so we started Community Grain Shares, where we created a model to buy grain from farmers in bulk. So we had a good network of grain farmers during our time for Chicago Bread Club, where we were holding monthly meetings. We always had local grain. We always had a community meal. We have farmers and folks in all areas of the grain chain coming in to talk to folks every month. So we had a network of local farmers to purchase from, and we knew people needed to still be able to have their stuff purchased. And then we bought it in bulk, and then we packaged it in smaller sizes to distribute. And for our ability to buy it in bulk, we were able to save money. And then actually here is this, and then we would package it in little bags and things like this. This is some black beans from a local farmer about an hour away. And then we would be able to distribute it through different channels. Like we have community fridges here. We call them love fridges, where people can take what they need or add things to, and people can come and choose what they want to shop from. We had means like people were doing crisis pantries, like organizations here, like one organization called Brave Space Alliance, where they were supplying people with emergency feeding food. And then through other mutual aid networks, on Wednesday, you'll kind of see my hands moving, because on Wednesdays I cook for this mutual aid project that also started out of the pandemic called Farm Food Familias. And we cook food it started for a lot of elders, folks who were homebound, couldn't get out. We make hot meals. It's me and 3 other chefs and some other community organizers, and we get food from farms, and then we supplement that, and we create hot meals for folks in community, mostly on the South and West Side, who need them. So now we cook 350 meals every week on Wednesdays and get them out. But we also wanted there to be local grain and prepared food. So we would get cornmeal and beans and things like that and supply those different organizations as far as our kind of emergency and mutual aid feeding programs. But then we also wanted to make sure that grain got to people who, it wasn't just because they needed free food, it's because they just needed access to it. And so, and they could maybe purchase it for maybe a reduced price or even retail price or any of those things. And so we partner with organizations and folks already doing the work of making food accessible here on the South and West Side. And one of those was a mobile market program called Fresh Moves Mobile Market, where originally there were like these outfitted buses that they would turn into grocery stores, and they could drive it to different areas of communities that might not have grocery stores or access to a lot of local produce, and people could hop on and shop. And now they have a newer vehicle that people could still hop onto and shop that's much smaller than a city bus. But we were able to put local grain in that market too. And people are able to, like on the South Side, on the West Side, all the places where they stop at a lot of community health centers, places like that. People are able to have access to this local grain. So it's specifically things that people are really a demand for. So we have local oats, which we did not know were going to be so popular, but our oatmeal is super popular. Local beans, grits, cornmeal, flour, all of these things we're able to get onto that local market, and we're able to get it at a pretty affordable price. And so people can hop on and pay with their nutrition program, like their like food stamps or those kind of EBT programs. They're able to pay with cash and card, whatever means that they have. And so that's, and then we're also trying to do that with other community organizations. We have like organization here that is doing a healthy corner store campaign. And so we're going to work with them to get local grain into their market. Just a lot of these places that maybe our grain farmers aren't really trying to reach, or you know, everybody's capacity is so limited, but so those are not the people on their priority list, right? And that's the people who are on my priority list, because this is my neighborhood, right? And so that's kind of what we're doing. We're figuring out ways to make this model work financially for us. We were able to get some COVID funding from some programs who were doing some funding last year to get it started. But we're really trying to figure out, like, how do we make this model really sustainable? We've been thinking about doing a subscription box and different ways like that, where we can kind of curate different farmers, local grain, and bring it together so that people who can pay this kind of full retail price are able to support our efforts of getting it out into community. And so that's something we're working on. But, you know, mostly what we work on right now is we buy this grain from farmers in bulk, so that we're still supporting the farmers. We package it into smaller entities, and then we get it out to both emergency feeding, mutual aid, as well as some of these kind of community marketplaces.
Great, Fresh. That's a super overview. There's a couple of questions about how many boxes a week you're making, and also the funding. And I think you answered a bit the funding.
Yeah, so we aren't doing it in boxes. And it depends on the week. So something like our mobile market, they might do a standing order where, like, every other week they will pick up, you know, maybe like 10 or 20 pounds of oat like bags, and we're either packaging them in like 1 pound bags or 2 pound bags, or 10 or 20 pounds of beans, 10 or 20, you know, pounds of oat, or popcorn, which we've just added recently because that's fun and people have been buying that, and cornmeal and grits and like all of these things. And then we have people who do kind of one time, like maybe like once a month or once every other month, where they put it into their program. There's like a pantry box where one organization is doing like all this fresh produce from local farms, and then they put in like a grain. And so they've been getting beans from us or things like that from us. So it's not like a steady amount that we're doing every week. But you know, we are at least doing at least 100 pounds of grain or so that we're getting out every week. But we don't have it quite set up yet to be a box. We're hoping to eventually, you know, be able to put out boxes where we can put it maybe at local bakeries, or maybe we can figure out a subscription mail model where folks in the region might want to purchase it, or even folks beyond the region might want to purchase it, so that we can like also make it cute, right? Be able to curate it, have different stuff from different farmers, have different themes, maybe have like cute stickers or pins or little zines, or, you know, fun cookbooks or different things in it, so that we're doing this curated project that still would support our communities here. And then I don't remember what the other question was, or how do I get to it on this?
Oh, tablet. it was just about the funding, but you kind of.
Yeah. So originally we had there's been two different ways we've got funding. One is during the pandemic, our Advocates for Urban Agriculture program here put out like a COVID response grant. And there were like different levels from like $1,000 to $10,000. And we were able to do a collaborative one and get the $10,000 grant for that. And so that's initially how we were able to start buying grain from farmers, and how to kind of kick this off and be able to like get stuff like packaged in, put some stickers on it, and all of that. So that was some original funding that we got last year around this time. And then recently we there's a group here, Chicago Regional Food System Alliance, where we were able to apply for a resilient food systems grant, and we're able to get a little bit more funding to kind of support some like a little bit of staffing and a little bit of other materials and grain and all of that stuff that we need to be able to try to do a better model of this to really create a model that is like kind of more resilient and more sustainable. And so that's what we're looking to do more of, the figuring out how to make this work so that it can sustain itself.
Right. And that's such a good goal, because once it's sustainable, it's technically duplicable. And that's what we want to see, because, you know, when I think of places across the country, there's not a lot of urban access in neighborhoods that don't have a Whole Foods or something like that. And even it's limited in, you know, so now Hannaford Supermarkets in the Northeast definitely has Main Grains, which is fantastic, but how to create this bridge. And I'm so excited that you're working on this. Thank you, Fresh. That's a terrific description. And I hope everybody's taken a look at the chat. Sarah Cox, I think her name was, or Sue Cox, said that there's a model where the organization is paying farmers wholesale prices through donations. So there's a lot of ways to try to make this work. Great. And okay, so next, I think it makes logical sense to slide over to Eric Shedler from Muddy Fork to discuss neighbor loaves, and which Fresh also has a role in. yeah, that had too. But we'll let Eric talk about it. And Eric, if you could take it away and tell us about how neighbor loaves started. And
well, first I just want to say how impressed I am with what you are doing, Fresh, and how many people it seems like, and many organizations you're connecting with. That's really great and really impressive. And if I can back up and digress a little bit, and maybe I should have read my background and I would already know this, but it sounds like you're working with a ton of different community partners. But is it all the same organization that you're running all those programs through yourself? And what is the name of that organization?
For me, yeah, so we're currently doing it at Chicago Bread Club. And so Chicago Bread Club is working with a lot of farmers that we've had connections with just from doing that. And then most of the entities that we're working with outside of that was just my personal connections from Fresher Together and the community work. I've been doing this work for a while of feeding and supporting and creating access to food for folks. And so, yeah, that's kind of who we're under the umbrella of. And we're trying to figure out how to even make that organization, which has just been a volunteer run organization, kind of more, sustainable too, because currently it's not. So one of the things we're looking at is my farm and food work is called Fresher Together. And we're like, maybe this should just be a baby of the work that I'm already doing, since kind of doing it as two separate things doesn't seem to quite work.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing there. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about Neighbor Loaves, which was a project created by the Artisan Grain Collaborative right after the start of the pandemic. And probably Amy and Fresh were involved in creating that. And it is a model for bakeries to run on their own. Basically, each bakery can run their own version of Neighbor Loaves, and the requirements for a bakery to participate are that you're using at least 50% local grain in the bread, and that you are taking in the donations yourself from your customers. You're selling Neighbor Loaves to customers, but instead of receiving that bread, the customer knows that they're paying for a loaf that you are going to bake and donate. So that's how the program works. We started, I think we did our first batch in the end of March 2020. And I think the program was originally designed to to help bakeries keep their production up when nobody was leaving their house, and also provide a way for customers to contribute people who were still working or still had money were really wanting to do something to help out, especially when the pandemic first started. And so we started doing neighbor loaves in March 2020. We use 100% locally grown grain from Janie's farm, which we mill ourselves at the bakery. We have a small stone mill where we mill most of our flours. So we mill all the grain for the neighbor loaves, 100% whole wheat breads, and we bake them once a week. And it took us a few weeks to sort of settle out to how much should we do per week. And we decided to make what we thought was a manageable amount for one person to work a full 8 to 9 hour day by themselves. So we make a full mixer bowl for the 80 quart mixer that we have, which is like about 100 pounds, 110 pounds of dough. And we make them into 76 neighbor loaves. And we've been doing that every week since March of 2020. And originally we were selling all of our neighbor loaves on our online store, which we set up a week after the pandemic started, or a week after shutdowns. And we had no trouble selling as many as we were producing, just on our online store. And over time, interest in ordering online has gone down somewhat. But we created other systems to try to keep those donations coming, because making those 76 loaves a week was a pretty manageable number for us. And the food pantry that we work with really wanted and appreciated that bread, and they still could use all of it and more, and then some. So we created, I send a thank you every week to everyone who's bought a neighbor loaf. And so I created a subscription form where people can sign up to just pay by the month and get billed for them. And so I've probably moved maybe a third to a half of our neighbor loaf donations that way. And we do sell a few in person at Farmers Market now that we're doing a lot of our sales through Farmers Market. But I'd say that we don't, it's harder to sell as many there. I think there's just it's harder for people to notice in an in-person setup versus when they're shopping at an online store. So we've still managed to keep pace. We're still taking in close to that 76 number per week. And, if I get 75, 80, 85% of that, I have no problem kicking in the difference. It's efficient for me to make that number. So it doesn't really make sense for me to make 10 less because I didn't get quite as many donations that week or whatever. So we're pretty committed that that's a permanent part of our production. It's fairly sizable because our total loaves per week that we sell is about 320 to 350. And then we're doing the 76 neighbor loaves on top of that. I'm trying to think what else I can tell you about it. I'll tell you a little bit about the partner that we work with. It's called Mother Hubbard's Cupboard, and it's a food pantry in Bloomington. We do have a really big food bank in Bloomington as well, and they do their own pickups and things. But the Mother Hubbard's Cupboard is a pantry that has got a little bit of a different model. It's a no barrier place, and it aims to provide choice for customers, although it's been different in the pandemic. But they don't require any proof of income or anything. It's all on the honor system. If you feel you need the food, you can go. Pre-pandemic, they set it up as a store, so you could shop, for whatever it is that your household needs. They have had to move to a box, with not safely having customers shop in their store, in their space. And they do a lot of other programs too, cooking programs, gardening programs. There are other partners they work with to collect local food from farmers markets and buy from growers who are willing to grow just for them. And they told me, not maybe 4 or 5 months ago, no, it was winter, I think. I was surprised to find out that they don't have other bread at this food pantry. And this may be a common thing, that when the food banks don't usually give out bread because it's not a USDA commodity. And they're dependent on that, for their supplies. And in getting donations from other places like, grocery stores and things hasn't worked out for this food pantry. They told me that if they get like a big, giant pallet box of bread, then half of it's moldy, most of it's smashed. It's not very usable for them. So they kind of just gave up on distributing bread. So they're really pleased to get our bread every week. However, it's about a sixth of what they could give out in a week. So we're a piece of what needs to be done. But even in our college town, we're not filling that whole gap.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I remember when I was still working at the food pantry, we got some award, a bank around us did a food drive. And so all the food pantries, or the bigger ones, came to the food drive and got the symbolic donation. And we brainstormed about bread. Like, that was the thing. I said, well, what do we need? Is it sliced bread? We need sliced bread, because and this is a problem that's been happening as machinery gets better and bigger bakeries get more predictive about how their overage. And so they don't have as much to donate as they used to. And now that we have this entrenched secondary feeding system, it's really been a difficult it's been a difficult thing. So this is one solution. Kayla, can you have Eric share
I just
his?
enabled it, Amy. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful.
Yep.
And so I think it's such a good model of how we can, fill a gap that really needs to happen. I have big dreams. Eric, you can go ahead and show pictures while I'm, can I talk? Is it okay if I talk my ideas?
Yeah, you're fine.
My idea is that we could, and this is happening a little bit at in Pittsburgh. Chatham Craft is doing some bakery training, and I'm just thinking of the opportunity for baking training for harder to there's so many coded words to underemployed, basically get the job skills of artisan baking and using regional flour into the hands of people who could be interested in baking for the community, or tying it to, just tying access to jobs. I think there's a lot of room for growth. I remember writing of having a dream that that maybe I could start a little bread program that's a training program here in my city. But this is a whole thing. I need someone with maybe when I retire from whatever I'm doing now, I could start a kitchen that's a training kitchen and is baking specifically for food pantries. And emergency feeding programs with local grain. I'd love to do that. But that's what the Neighbor Loaf program does. And I'd love to invite, Eric, thank you. I think that was a great introduction to it. And I think it's a perfect segue over to Catherine Curley talking about Neighbor Loaf. Community loaves, Catherine. And we'll have time for more discussion later. So Catherine, will you please take it away?
It would be my pleasure. Thank you. Neighbor Loaves, Community Loaves, it's all in the same spirit and energy and space. And it's really inspiring to hear these iterations. On the East Coast in the Midwest, I am talking to you today from Cleveland. I've been visiting my son who just graduated from college. So pretty exciting for us. So you may hear, we actually fly back to the West Coast right after this panel discussion. So there could be husbands and a kid, coming in and out of the hotel room, but we'll see how this goes. I just wanted to say, Eric, thank you for sharing all about neighbor loaves. And I was really struck by many of the common elements that these food banks, on one hand, you think bread, they have probably received lots and lots of bread, right? And often my experience is that these food banks do, but it's not the kind of bread that really nourishes and creates health. And so food banks have been really excited for receiving the bread that we've been making. And in this case, from serious home bakers or just anybody who just really wants to know how to bake bread and contribute. I do have a slide presentation that I can go through to talk about our program. Am I set up to do that?
Should be.
Okay. I just share my screen.
Yes.
Is that what I do? Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, Community Loaves is definitely doing what it hopes it can to support some equity in the grain chain, specifically around using and asking people to use freshly milled whole grain flours that are coming from our local grain shed, regional grain shed. In our case, we're using home bakers, okay? Our mission is to connect, train, and empower home-based bakers to reduce hunger at local food pantries through the donation of freshly baked bread. It's that kind of simple and straightforward. And why bread? Bread brings people together. It's a safe product to donate. It's relatively inert. The health department doesn't get too upset. You don't have to have a battery of certifications in order to donate bread safely, at least in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, where we are. Good bread is needed. Much of what is donated to food banks today falls short in nutritional density, and it's certainly often, right, made out of commodity flours, heavily processed and sifted flours. Bread skills are validating. This idea that you can learn to make a delicious loaf of bread and then give that to someone to nourish them, it provides many of us with a sense of purpose and happiness. And bread also allows us to foster a vibrant local grain economy, things that are central and really important to me. Prior to starting Community Loaves, I had a broad networked group in the Seattle area called Northwest Bread Bakers, where we just communed and supported all things related to connecting around bread. Our loaf, the Community Loaf, inspired by different activities going on, whether it's the Wazoo Approachable Loaf or Eric's Neighbor Loaf, but what could we apply from a network group of home bakers? Our loaf is approachable, familiar, sandwich friendly, it tastes great. It's 100% whole grain and high extraction flour. The actual ratio is 50-50 of whole grain and high extraction flour. Supports the local grain mission. We source our flours from Cairn Spring, Fairhaven, Hillside Grain in Idaho, and Gaston's. Gaston's is a bakery in Boise, and they mill their flour from a locally grown hard red spring wheat out of Haley, Idaho. We have multiple formulas for our bread. The only difference is their leavening. We consider ourselves an equal leavening opportunity organization. So if you want to use straight yeast, great. If you want to be straight natural ferment, fine. And then we have a formula in between. Our bread also has an oatmeal porridge in it, and that makes that bread a little bit more complicated, but also really delicious, and it ups the nutritional density by increasing the fiber. And you know why we add honey and olive oil. So our mission to connect, train, and empower, just talking about connection. This organization has unified by a central theme that we are breader together. And it has been our tag since inception. And I love fresh, the fresher together, because I absolutely agree with that. That's awesome. Home bakers care through feeding others. And that's who we seem to attract. We began as about 19 bakers, and that has grown to a volunteer force of near 1,000. We are in 3 states, but predominantly in Washington. Idaho, I'd say we're just getting our toe wet. In Oregon, we're really starting to get our scaffolding and our structure in place. In order to pull this off, we use a neighborhood hub system. So a lot of spokes and wheel and spokes, and we have 45 neighborhood hubs. We're connected by spirit. And let's see if I can go back to this. This is just an example of one of our bakers and one of the hearts. And I'll just give you a moment to read this poem by this middle school English teacher, Chris Coughlin-Ray, who spent the evening, the mid-morning, not only writing the poem, but getting her levain ready for her next day build. I love this. I bake for a thread that moves through us all. And I think this is what happened during the pandemic when the world came to a stop. We were so very, very hungry for connection. Community Loaves absolutely intends and purposely tries to connect us all together through our love of baking and nourishing others. This emergency project turned mission provides meaningful hands-on purpose without compromising the social distancing that was in place. And we managed to do a great deal while still being safe from in a social distance world. Okay, so connect and training is also at the heart of what we're doing with Community Loaves. There are not many shortcuts to great bread, and so we offer a fair bit of training. Some of our bakers will say that they have been baking from home for a long time, but our formula tends to give them a run for their money, and it takes an investment in time. It's a 6-hour, 7-hour process, not counting the overnight of your pre-ferment. So we hold volunteer sessions. They're held monthly. We provide the recipe format in multiple versions. There are a number of videos to support the baker journey. We have Community Loaves forums that we just launched for our volunteers. Of course, we've got some group behavior and social media. And then we have baker sessions, that hands-on bake with me. My home garage has been converted to Community Loaves mothership, if we call it. We do the test, all of our bread testing in the test kitchen. We do virtual baker debriefs where I just turn the Zoom camera on and we go through autolyzing and all this, what does it mean to have a good proofed loaf and what's underproofed and all of that good stuff. And then the newest thing that we're starting to test and work through our community community kitchens, and we're piloting 2 of those. We have a church kitchen, which is not receiving much use today. And they wanted to give us that space to use to do planned and organized training bakes. We can throw all the loaves right into their larger freezer system and set them aside for our donation Sundays. So that's, we're pretty excited about that. So training is key to our success. It supports product consistency and confidence, creates a baker literacy around the project and a well-made loaf. And as it relates to equity and making sure that people use these really great, more nutritious flours, it's really important to have that training. And I'd like to suggest that the training also helps support a more appreciative customer or consumer of artisan baked goods. So the more understanding you have for a really good quality loaf of bread, the more apt you are to be willing to spend to purchase that loaf. Part of our training includes the different nutritional densities of flour and flour processing, and we use from Scott Mangold and the Unifying Mills flour bench study out of the Minnesota as part of our training program, just to help people understand that not all, flour isn't all the same, but that we use fresh, locally milled flour for its flavor, its performance, and of course for its nutrition. To date, since the project began, we've ordered close to 40,000 pounds of flour to support our project. And we couldn't do this project without a lot of friends in the industry, from Mel Derbyshire, who is a consultant, mentor, advisor to me, as well as George De Pasquale from Essential Baking. And of course, this character and many of the others listed here, but they help keep keep me informed and going, and I love to learn from. And then of course we have the Artisan Grain Collaborative and Cascadia Grains, all that I have, I sip from the fire hose, if you will, in terms of the information to help support what we're doing. Empower is the last part of our mission. So connect, train, and empower. And the way that we empower our home bakers is we help share stories of success, and we celebrate personal bests. Our volunteer login page will tell you how many loaves you've done to date. And we're starting to use a sandwich meter, because sometimes, one loaf might not seem like so much, but 7 sandwiches is what you could make out of that one loaf. We try to remove barriers to participation. You do not have to bake bread in order to participate. We have a lot of volunteer roles. And if you want to bake bread, we'll start you off with our simplest yeasted formula. We try to foster an engaged and supportive community, and those geographic hubs are part of that. We've had individuals meet their neighbors in a way that they had not known their neighbors before, all around bread. Of course, it's we're looking to provide access to high quality fresh flours. We intend to roll out a little bit of more fun in the process. I love Fresh Robertson's, we're going to make it cute somehow. And we're going to provide some baker badges so that people have these sort of next steps, next hurdle. And our volunteers do get a couple of unique discounts related to being part of this project. So it's a win-win. The food bank gets bread, our clients get really great bread. We're supporting the grain economy, but you can also get a discount on premium flours. You can get a discount on your commercial USA pans, and you can get a discount on a mixer. So a growing sense there. Of course, this is all about impact. We reduce hunger at local food pantries with this cadre, this band of bread bakers. We started with one food pantry. There were 5 of us that donated 19 loaves, and that has become 25 food pantries that we are now getting our bread to. And we've made 34 donations and donated 34,000 loaves. Or my new big number, enough for 480,000 sandwiches. So we just think that this is great, but I want to go back to something that Eric said, which is at 25 is that it's still 1/6. Eric's number was 1/6. I'm going to say we're about a third of the demand in any given week at a food bank in terms of fresh bread. So with 25 food banks, that is about 7,000 clients a week. And our largest donation to date for a week was 3,500 loaves in that week. So we are anywhere from a third to half of the demand. We make our donations only twice a month. And moving forward. So, but our food banks love us. They'll say we get bread, but we don't get fresh home baked bread. They'll take every loaf that we can give them. A nice quote here from one of the food bank supervisors in the shoreline area of Seattle, that they just find the bread delicious. We've had a cute anecdote where the food bank wasn't open, but they knew the bread was delivered there that day or dropped that day. And the client swung by anyway to see if they could snag a loaf because they were so concerned that they would not get it the next day, that they would run out. So people love the bread. But I want to highlight something that came out in the Washington Post just a couple weeks ago, June 11th, that reminded us that reducing food insecurity just isn't enough, that we actually need to be focused on nutrition security, which is why I just really am so thrilled by the work that Fresh is doing and Eric is doing, and that we need to reduce hunger at local food pantries while focusing on nutrition security. And nutrition can come out of that attention to local farmers, local grain, minimally processed, and no junk in our bread. So that is what we're trying to do, one nutritious loaf at a time, using freshly milled local and regional flours. And it's how we are doing our best, Amy, to follow some of your excellent example, knitting equity into the grain chain.
Oh, well, you have a bevy of questions in yeah. You hit some marks, but one that I want to bring up is the logistics of getting this to food banks, because I know that in my it's up to individual pantries in my state whether they'll accept home baked goods, and the larger food pantries won't take that risk. That, for instance, the one I worked at. So what have you done to help get the food banks in the states that you work in accepting of home baked goods?
So it hasn't been very hard for us, and I do understand that there are going to be some regional challenges. And if we needed to use a certified kitchen, I would look to some of these churches as a model for creating a certified space, because they often have event-style kitchens. The one that I'm using at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church on Mercer Island has two really nice stacked convection ovens. No, they're not bread ovens, but we're doing a tinned loaf. So the tinned loaf can be produced fairly easily there. And you could get that to be your certified or licensed space. And you probably want to get all of your bakers to have a food handler's permit, which at least in our state is a $10 investment. So it's not huge, and there's rarely any language barriers to getting that food handler's permit. And that might help. We actually, and you might be surprised that there may be some benevolent loopholes to donating to these food banks. often food banks have a policy that prevents home donation. And that is more a logistical and practical issue. You just don't want all of these one-off people dropping off their pumpkin loaf, their chocolate chip cookies, their, recent baked goods. They're not staffed for that. They're dealing with pallets of food. It's an operational nightmare for them to have, just the well-intentioned, lovely home baker dropping things off. We have organized ourselves in such a way that you don't have to worry about that. We bring the bread to the pantry in, sort of truckloads, if you will, and kind of meet them where they are. And we've also created a consistent standardization. Okay, so
Yeah.
everything is labeled, it has the ingredients on it. Home bakers don't bring their pumpkin loaf with a label on it that says, hey, this has these ingredients and allergens. And so all of those things help to assure the food bank that they want this loaf.
And your training also helps that, right? It's
Right.
that helped overcome that. So perhaps formally expanding with you in hand could help get more states aligned to this and overcome the obstacles. Yeah. I think there's a lot of questions, but I think what I'd like to do is invite the Nourish New York folks to talk now, and then get through the rest of the speakers, and we can go back to asking more questions to you, Catherine. Is that okay?
Absolutely. I want to hear from these other speakers.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much. It's so good to see. Oh, and I know what I was going to say is the Northeast Grain Shed has a calculator. So it's 18 square feet in a loaf of bread, of grain. So there's another number you can do to add on 18 square feet. Well, we'll run it through our calculator.
Okay, that's great.
Great, thank you. Jessica and or Mark, I'm not sure if you're here. Are you ready to talk about Nourish New York?
Hi, everybody. Yes, absolutely.
Thanks,
want to start
Mark.
by, sure. I want to start by apologizing for not having a camera. We got tagged into this late Monday evening, so didn't have an opportunity to secure one of those USB cameras we have. So just a voice. I apologize for that. But very excited to be here. Very excited to talk about this program. It's something that our entire agency is really proud of, and we love the opportunity to inform people about it. So I'll give just kind of a general overview of the program, and then I'll turn it over to my associate, Jessica Brooks, who actually works hand in hand with a lot of the producers and processors in the program to kind of detail some of the efforts there. So Nourish New York was a unique response to New York's COVID-19 emergency food response. The idea was to use emergency funds to purchase food products from upstate New York farms and direct those products to food banks across New York State. I think people immediately think of New York City, but really the need was high everywhere across the state at that moment. So in order to do that, the program partners with the 10 regional food banks that together cover all the emergency feeding needs across the state. The food banks are required to spend the funding provided on New York sourced products, and the Department of Ag and Markets plays a big role in making those connections between the food bank procurement people and our New York State producers, and then some of our larger aggregators of those products as well. These products have been delivered to New Yorkers in need in a number of creative ways across the state. At this point, we've created over 27 million meals. That number is steadily rising as the program continues on. A little more of the numbers. With round 4 queued up to start, we are just executing contracts with our food banks at this point for this round. We have invested $85 million into this program through the end of the year. Another number to throw out there. Throughout the program to this point now, we've impacted 4,100 farms in New York State, And that is also a number that continues to grow as we create these relationships and create kind of the logistics to get product from upstate to really across the state at this point. I've worked on a number of state programs. I started at our Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, so I've worked with nutrition programs before. And I can say that this is probably one of the most well-received programs that I've been a part of. Our food bank participants are excited. Our farmers are obviously very excited about this. And the participants that receive the meals, obviously, this is great, local, fresh as can be produce. Really across the board, we've had a lot of success and a lot of good feelings. Our legislature put a bill forth this past session to make this a permanent program. At the moment, we're just kind of working out the details of how that's going to look going forward, and the governor's expected to sign it pretty shortly. So another piece we're very excited about. We've kind of shifted a lot of our staff. Our programs kind of went dormant with COVID, and I think across the board we really slowed down a bit. So we were able to shift our staff into this and really build this program up to the point now that it's become, I don't want to say easy to run, but a lot of hard work and effort, because we had the ability to move people into that role. These people are now moving on to as our programs are coming back online. The staff's getting a little tighter, a little smaller, but as I've said, we've really worked hard on the logistics. Our partners have kind of gotten great relationships with us. We have candid conversations on opportunities to improve. It's really been a tremendous program. I'm very excited to be a part of it. And one of the team members that played an enormous role in getting this together is Jessica Brooks. She is our Grown and Certified Program Manager, another great New York State program. But I'll give her now an opportunity to kind of speak on how the relationships with the producers and the processors formed, and particularly some of the grain folks that we've worked with in this program.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. This really has been an incredible team effort, obviously. So, I mean, between the coordinators of the department to the people that have been obviously working at the food banks and reaching out to their communities and figuring out what their needs are, and then these amazing producers that were able to do things they had never done before in the middle of a pandemic with probably half their staff. I just kind of want to shout out to some of the businesses who really, and I know this word is so overused in the past year and a half or so, but who completely pivoted the way that they do things in order to provide a product that was going to be eligible for this program. And I know we're going to be hearing from Kate a little bit later from Spoglini Pasta, but it's a great example. So I won't take what she's going to be talking about, but they created a pasta that they had never made before, because the requirement was the product had to be grown in New York. And we understood that with some of these producers do have a baked product that is 100%, or a pasta or a pita chip that is 100% New York, there could be some challenges. So we allowed, in certain circumstances, 85%, which was still an incredible feat based upon that we're not a huge grain state. I mean, getting bigger, getting stronger all the time. And I think that these businesses really going out there and trying to source the product, work with mills who up to this point were not separating out their New York grain from the grain coming in from Canada or other states. Really everybody learned a lot, worked together, and created some really successful products. So in addition to Spoglini, who was sourcing some of their flour from farmer ground flour, who's been really terrific through all of this, and sourcing supplying flour and cornmeal in the raw form to a lot of food banks, and working with Grow NYC, and working with I've been providing Genesee Valley beans, and just that raw flour was something that was really in demand in the beginning, and very hard to come by in the beginning of the pandemic. And then kind of as time moved on, And people, the food banks really said, a lot of folks really need ready to eat breads and pastas that they can cook, and you know, things that are more accessible to them. So some of the, well, I would first start with Issa's Pita Chips, which was a Cedars Bakery. It was out in Rochester, in the Buffalo area. They were a deli that also created these pita chips. And through the demand of Farm to School and now Nourish, this pita chip business became so popular. And it was such a great shelf stable item made with 100% New York whole grains that they now have just dedicated all of their business and attention to the pita chip manufacturing. But again, to have a wholesome snack that could be put into these boxes for distribution, some of which were 7,000 cars long. I mean, it just has been incredible, the need. And so for a business like that to just, you know, figure out how to make it happen has been amazing. You know, Grow NYC has been terrific on the distribution front, because a lot of producers really didn't know how to or have the logistics to get their product into New York City. So to have that final mile distribution was invaluable. And, you know, they really are so knowledgeable about what is out there and the different grains that are being grown in the state, and being able to work with food banks who maybe couldn't take 2 pounds, but really needed to have a smaller retail size pack and be able to repack for that sort of thing. I mean, Genesee Valley beans, I don't think that many people really realized that we have all these black beans and kidney beans and things like that growing in New York. And now here is a perfect product for home cooks to work with, and it had cultural importance, and it really was very well received and continues to be. I mean, the program is still shockingly used. I mean, these food banks still have really, really high demand. And so I'm glad that these businesses that have really scaled up will continue to see that demand, and especially, you know, depending upon the continuation of Nourish, that is wonderful. Another one is Perfect Granola, which is has been sourcing oats from New York, and that demand for oats is higher and higher for many reasons. But you know, oatmeals and granolas and things like that are easy, accessible, healthy, and they've been sourcing all their oats from Gianforte Farm. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Also, Burkett Mills has been a really amazing partner, and they, prior to the pandemic, were not separating out their New York wheat. So because they've been able to isolate that New York wheat, they now are working with businesses like Svoglini and the pita chip folks, and really being able to help them create a product that's not only eligible for Nourish, but also for our Farm to School program. And that, you know, is nice, because the work that they're doing at all of these businesses is not just going to help them with Nourish. It will help them get into the schools and be part of our 30% reimbursement program. So, which we know will be continuing on. So all of this stuff is going to be supported from a couple of different programs within the state. I also wanted to talk about our daily bread in Chatham, New York. And I know they wanted to speak, but because they are doing it all, they were doing deliveries today and weren't able to make it. But what they had really found when reaching out to the food banks is that, and I think this was mentioned before, is that what food banks really needed was sliced bread. And what they actually, a lot of the food banks in New York City were saying, we need a soft sliced bread. The artisanal style bread doesn't work for all of our communities, especially when we're talking about homeless populations and people that, you know, are not going to have an easy time with a very hard bread. So they developed a bread just for this program, you know, that was, and I don't know the lingo, and I apologize, but a pan loaf. I think I'm right in saying that. It had a higher oil content. to make it softer, to help the shelf life. And they have been doing just an absolutely amazing job with this product. And it's been so well received. It's great sandwich bread, and it's 100% New York whole wheat. So that is just, I mean, such a nutritious loaf of bread. And they really, you know, one of the things they said that they love about this is that they've always wanted to be able to work with emergency food services and communities in need, and they really just couldn't necessarily afford to. And they would donate, you know, at the end of one of their days at the market, they would donate everything that they had left over. But that food banks would often, you know, and it was this mentioned as well earlier, that it's hard to work with 30 loaves. How do you distribute 30 loaves in a way that is equitable? But because they could now produce on such a larger scale that was appropriate for the large scale distributions that were happening, you know, that connection with the food bank, that relationship with the food bank has really blossomed. And that is, I think, the really one of the happiest stories of this whole thing is that these food banks now understand how their community is producing all this amazing food that they really never thought was accessible to them. And obviously the Nourish funding has been incredibly helpful in paying for that and making that happen. But we're hoping that, you know, these relationships are even beyond Nourish, if, you know, when and if the program ends at some time, that those relationships continue, and that awareness of what is being grown in your communities, produced in your local communities, continues. And also just kind of the education that it has given the people that it's been serving about seasonality, and maybe exposing people to new, you know, kohlrabi, things that they aren't used to eating, you know, and really kind of challenging the way people are cooking and thinking about food. And just this sense of community that I think the program has given has been really wonderful. And I've loved working with the producers who have thought outside the box, figured out a way to make it happen to feed the people of New York. So that's, oh, and I will say that up to this point, or through round 3, we're on round 4, approximately 282,000 pounds of grains have gone into this program. And that is an estimation. That does not include a bunch of the black beans. It doesn't include some of the cornmeal, but that is kind of, we know at least that. And that's been about $621,000 of investment just in, you know, that portion of the grains alone. And again, I know we're missing some black beans and some other things in that assessment.
That's great. This is like my dream come true, Jessica, because it's so, having worked in the emergency feeding system, there's no discretionary dollars to make a bridge into, you know, specialty breads made from local flour. And the model that you guys have made happen in New York shows such leadership to the rest of the states in what could happen, especially because the USDA commodity boxes were excluding grains specifically. And I don't know if that was because of the commodity programs and saying, oh, we have that ground covered, but it really did create a disadvantage to regional grain projects that were trying to step up to the plate and do something different. And to know that New York just said, okay, let's support the agriculture, let's support the processors. It's wonderful. Thank you very much for telling us about it.
Of course. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. We'll be knocking on your door again. Thanks. And now I would like to ask Silas to talk about, Silas, are you ready to talk about Headwater and how you figured in with Nourish New York, and also your own mission as an organization to do this kind of work, even with or without New York State funding?
Sure, yeah.
Terrific, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Silas. I'm the director of supply chain for Headwater Food Hub, and an owner of the Food Hub. We are a food hub based in just east of Rochester, New York. We actually now have 2 locations, one in Rochester and one about an hour and a half south, around 15 minutes south in the Finger Lakes of New York State. Mark and Jessica mentioned New York State. Most people think of New York City, but we're a pretty big state, pretty big agricultural state, and so we're situated in kind of more of the rural part of the state. For those of you who don't know what a food hub is, or haven't come across that concept before, essentially, we're a distributor and kind of supply chain coordinator that's focused on regional sourcing, specifically from New York. And we work with about 200 producers across New York State. Everything from fresh produce to protein, dairy, and obviously grain and flour. We have a pretty diverse set of producers too. Everyone from kind of 5-acre market gardeners up to the 7th generation 2,000-acre orchards along Lake Ontario. So it's a dream job. It's been a dream business to have for me, and yeah, really getting to see a cross section of our agriculture and work with so many great people within New York State agriculture. So I'm going to try to keep this somewhat brief and specifically talk about kind of our the grain supply chain throughout the pandemic and before that. So I guess first, what happened? What did we do? So during the pandemic, we basically pivoted our New York State supply chain, a lot of our producer relationships, and including creating some new relationships to meet demands of the emergency food system, largely through Nourish New York. It's been an awesome program, but also we have participated a bit with the USDA Farm to Families program as kind of a indirectly supplying other partners. We didn't win a bid for that program, but we had several partners that did. So we were supplying them with New York State product. And then the other kind of funding source for us throughout the pandemic, we have a direct to consumer model in the Rochester and Finger Lakes area. And so that tends to be kind of more of a higher end market, more of a sort of specialty online grocery experience. And so what we were able to do is basically create fundraisers for community-based organizations in our just in our own region, kind of immediate region, Rochester and the Finger Lakes. And we would put up a fundraiser for like 2 to 3 weeks at a time, kind of whoever, based on sort of our own community connections and who was saying they really needed, X for their food pantry or Y. And so I forget what the total number is, but we were actually able to raise about $40,000 from our customers that, that could pay during the pandemic for community-based organizations. So anyway, I just bring that up. A lot of creativity on the Headwater team to find the sources of funding to get good food into people's hands that really needed it during this time. But Nourish New York, I would say, is definitely was the biggest contributor to our ability to specifically get grain into the clients of food banks and community-based organizations throughout New York State. It's interesting to hear Jessica's number. My number is not just Nourish New York, but kind of all of the ways that we've been moving product. We've been able to deliver about 130 tons, so 260,000 pounds of flour, basically flour, cornmeal, and oats to customers, to food banks, and other community-based organizations throughout the pandemic. And also, I've been able to, as part of kind of a mixed dry goods boxes that we've been producing, been able to include a lot of things like Sweeney pasta and perfect granola and Isa's chips, pita chips, some of the things that Jessica mentioned. So, and that's definitely at a, that's a more significant scale than, our normal, just like institutional wholesale business before the pandemic. We also were able to invest in repacking equipment. So one of the things that Fresh mentioned at the very beginning, and Jessica mentioned as well, it has been really important, is finding sort of what are these bottlenecks in the supply chain, and where can we make small investments that have relatively large impact. And so for us, quickly kind of fun nerdy spreadsheet team at Headwater, did a quick pro forma. Can we invest in this repack equipment? Yes, we can. It makes sense. Got that into place. Got that in the the new warehouse location that we set up for packing boxes during the pandemic, and that has really leveraged our ability to get grains and flours and dry beans, as Jessica mentioned, into a lot of kind of new customers, new clients, hands, fridges, tables. But it also has opened up a number of opportunities, I think, for us that do kind of extend beyond the pandemic. I think that was just that sort of obviated and a sort of food system need in our region. And so I think from, my perspective, having been kind of this bootstrappy, entrepreneur, and then later supply chain engineer, I think that this example has really been sort of like a little bit of a dream come true in some ways, of like being able to participate in this supply chain of mid-sized businesses, mid-sized farms, mid-sized processors, mid-sized food hub, really like supporting all of those businesses along the way, and then getting food into hands of people that had, low income or no income at the time. And, like on the agricultural side, really using like regenerative practices. Like, it feels, through my entrepreneurial journey, it always has felt like you can kind of have like, you just like can't have it all, sort of, and like there's always some kind of conservation of either the economics don't work, or the right partners aren't there, the demand isn't there, some piece of that supply chain isn't there. But in this case, actually we're able to line up all of those things. And one of the interesting things too, I think, is that like points that was brought up around nutrition security. One of the things that we found during our process over the last year is working with some of these larger food banks and food pantries that have pretty strict nutritional requirements and reporting requirements. We've actually done some of the analyses that we hadn't done on some of our regionally grown and regionally milled products, and it turns out we have like pretty significant nutritional advantages over conventional products. And that was, I don't have like the exact numbers to give you, but like at least for the farmer ground flour, all-purpose flour, sort of like macro and micronutrients were like both like significantly higher, and some of the food bank, our partners at the food banks were like impressed and surprised by that. So it really is not to just like make it a total love fest, but there's just so much feel good about like this is actually like getting better food to people that need it. So that's kind of what has happened in a very small nutshell. And I think just quickly, the kind of like, I'm a food person, so I sort of think about like what was the recipe for that? What was the recipe for that happening? So I've come up with 4 elements that kind of reinforced each other, sort of the recipe of this supply chain coming together. So the first one, and maybe the obvious one, is like the disruption, right? The pandemic disruption. And that definitely created a situation where demand was up, and the supply chain, or there were, just like the global supply chain, was under a lot of duress and broke in a lot of places. For those of you who have been in local foods for a long time, you might feel this way, but for us, it kind of felt like we're sort of like the mad scientists that have been like saying, like, yeah, there's like really big problems with this global food system, and like the concentration of our global food system is problematic in a bunch of ways, like including, its resilience. So anyway, it sort of felt like sad and sort of validating at the same time, that like, yes, we've been saying these things are issues. And sure enough, when we had this disruption, there just weren't as many alternatives for food banks to get this food. And then obviously the great efforts of folks on this call coming in to get a policy in place and get the funding in place to kind of support the food banks getting food that already existed within our regional supply chain, how to get that food. So disruption was the first elements of the recipe, but it's definitely not the whole story, and it started kind of a long time before. I think the story for me started well before the pandemic. Kind of shared vision and trust amongst producers and the buyers and policymakers and people at ag markets. Definitely felt like amongst a group of people there was just like a long-term vision leading up to this, and like wanting to expand the local food, the sort of like local food movement, and the sort of elitist nature of the local food movement, that good food to more people. And so some of the relationships that were really key in this, definitely I would say, like, Headwaters' relationship with Greg and Neil and the folks at Farmer Ground. I played basketball with Greg for a number of years, and like our kids are the same. We have kids that are the same age, and like maybe it sounds goofy, but like just like like we know, like our families know each other, and there's just like a lot of faith. I think there's a lot of faith in each other, like during the sort of scary disruption, like having to move fast. And so like one of the lessons for me in this is like trust allows complex supply chains to move fast. Like to get the complexity to sort of figure out everything that we needed to figure out in the last year, with like kind of the full on like the sort of the I won't say like we did things improperly, but like the letter of intent, the MOU, and all of the partnership contracts. It's not that we didn't come up with, sort of partnership agreements during that time, but just to move as fast as we did to respond to the opportunity and the crisis, it definitely just like took some trust. I would say a lot of trust that we were gonna like all work this out together. And the other one that I wanted to mention too was, specifically the relationship with Ag and Market. So TC, who really probably should be the one giving this talk here, is our director of community programs at Headwater, has a really extensive background in hunger relief. She and I had both worked significantly with Jessica Brooks at Ag and Markets in the past, before the pandemic, through the farm to school initiative. New York State has an initiative to reimburse schools at a higher rate if they purchase more than 30% of their food budget for lunch from New York State farms. so we had been working together on that, and the Grown and Certified program, which is kind of related to the school program. So we already had a relationship, and so when the pandemic hit and Nourish New York launched, it felt like I really did just tell you this as you're here. It just really did feel like great to be able to like we have someone we can talk to, and like you helped us out figuring out farmers that needed to move product, and when we were trying to really make sure that all the reporting requirements for the program were right, and you answered so many questions for TC and I about that. So anyway, I think both of those, there's probably 20 or 30 different relationships that sort of allowed things to move fast, but those are two that I wanted to point out. And that's another, I guess my third element of the recipe is I think Nourish New York is an amazing program. I really hope that it can be funded perpetually. I think there's so many success stories. But I also wanted to point out that I think that there were sort of successive policies that kind of laid the groundwork for it in some way. So the farm to school in New York State, again, having that initiative and Grown and Certified, that those kind of started a lot of the relationships that were important during the pandemic, because they were similarly, as they are still, they're focused on getting local and regional food into schools. So it is sort of this food access producer access balance problem. So I really feel like having that farm to school program and sort of it was very much a practice for this the crisis in a lot of ways, and developing these supply chains, and then the Grown and Certified program and its relationship to the reporting requirements for how schools could get reimbursed. It was really helpful, I think, to have just sort of a common language and a common framework for the reporting. I mean, it sounds boring. It's not the most glamorous part of it, but it's what makes the funding work for both our farm to school program and for Nourish New York. And so go into the pandemic and already have some of that common language and framework, I think was really helpful. And then last, just my last recipe element was just kind of end-to-end supply chain management. So it just really does require getting the details right at every level, from the farms to repacking and logistics and the customer relationships. And our team at Headwater, just to give a shout out, Annalise Bay, TC Washington, Stefan Schwartz, Michael Kincaid, the whole Farm Ground team. I'm not talking about the Sfellini story, but there's a similar story with y'all and in coordinating all of this. And it's just been really amazing to have really effective, candid, fun team working together on this, and needing to get all those details right. And then the last bit, and I mentioned this about the investment, but from a supply chain management standpoint, being able to find the bottlenecks in the sort of in the system, and having the kind of, in some ways, having the trust in those partnerships to see Farmer Ground had a bottleneck in being able to bag flour, and really, if you know those guys, they really just want to be milling all of the time, and they're milling nerds. It's great. I mean, it's amazing to talk to all of them. Anyway, but we were able to see that was a bottleneck, and we could invest in that, sort of that repacking element, made room for them to mill more flour. Anyway, just to be able to kind of consistently find where the problems in the system, and be able to find a solution. All right, sorry, I know that I got pretty excited talking about it and sort of the retrospective, but that was my recipe.
I love it. I love it. I think everybody else does too. Thanks, Silas. That's wonderful. So much to think about, and thanks for putting it into a recipe so we can all do it in our own home kitchens, so to speak, metaphorically. Kate, are you still here? I hope you are ready to tell us all your great story of practical magic in bringing your pasta into this landscape that you didn't consider at the beginning of starting the pasta company.
Yeah, so thanks, Amy, for setting all of this up, and Jessica and Silas kind of are a lot of the foundation of how we have been able to do what we've done. So Sfollini pasta has been around for about 8 years, and historically we've been really focused on the like high-end grocery store consumer. Our pasta hits the shelf at $8 a pound. It's not something that's we ever considered being able to get into food banks. And about a year ago, New York State Department of Ag and Markets reached out to let us know about the Nourish New York program and see if it would at all be feasible for us to create a pasta that would qualify for the program. We needed to have a pasta that was made with 85% New York State flour, which is a little bit tricky because pasta is typically made with semolina and needs that for that kind of characteristic al dente bite. And using 85% high extraction flour from farmer ground, you sacrifice a little bit of that al dente bite, but the flavor is still really awesome. So we, to Silas's point, kind of when Ag and Markets reached out, we just said, yes, we could do it without totally having all of the pieces in place. But we wanted to say yes, that we could do it and figure out if anybody else, if any food banks really wanted to partner with us there. So I'm the operations manager at Sfollini, and really what I focused on was figuring out how do we figure out all the other parts of the operations and logistics to be able to offer as competitive a price as possible. So what we decided to do was more or less do one shape in one kind of pack size and only sell it by full pallets. And we needed to line up enough orders to always be running full days. So for us, a full day of pasta is about 5,500 pounds. And if we run less than that, we kind of like reduce our efficiency enough that it makes it too hard for us to offer the lowest price possible. So what we were trying to do was offer to take our distributor level pricing, like what we sell to UNFI at, and then knock it down by 10%. And so all of those kind of like operations pieces needed to align perfectly in order for us to be able to offer that price. So it took us about 2 months to first get a label approved by No for New York and figure out how we were going to do the packaging. As mentioned before, a lot of times it's not even like making the food, it's these supply chain issues on packaging that are the trickiest. And packaging has been for us a really chronic issue. So we sent out our first orders in October of last year, and in August we'll ship. We'll hit 250,000 boxes. So we've done hundreds of thousands of retail size boxes into food banks. And Headwater has been our closest partner. We've shipped 125 pallets of pasta through Headwater. And for us, it has been really great to keep our, to fill the gaps in our production schedule. Right now, it's kind of horrible because like everybody, we're having staffing problems. So it's tough to fill those gaps now. But for us, our business has swung really wildly during the pandemic. And so for us, Nourish New York, has helped us as much as we feel like we're helping food banks. And so I think, that's kind of the the other part of programs like Nourish New York that are really incredible is that they allowed a lot of businesses to kind of move along more steadily. And then the other awesome part of what Nourish New York did for us is once we realized that we could pull this off, that we could make this pasta, have it go towards food relief organizations and still like cover our costs, our packaging costs, our ingredient costs, our staffing costs. It allowed us to think about other programs that we could participate in. So this fall, we'll launch a pasta for farm to school that's made with 51% New York State flour coming from Burkett Mills. So we've been partnering with Burkett over the last few months to figure out what flour of theirs that we could use and running those tests. So now possibly, we'll be getting Sfolini into a lot of schools this fall. And then the other really exciting thing that happened for us was meeting other people for whom Nourish New York kind of changed the way that they thought either about local food or the way they thought about food relief. So I think there are a lot of awesome people like Fresh, like Amy, who have always held these two worlds in their, work together. But I think there are a lot of people like Sfolini and a lot of people like food banks where you kind of wind up in your own world and you are pursuing a really valuable mission, but you kind of wind up like stuck in your track. So for us, this has been, really eye-opening. And I mean, we've always like donated excess for years, but it was never a significant part of our business. And so for now for us, it is, and we'll be moving forward. And we, with Headwaters collaboration, tomorrow are shipping out a brand new pasta for an organization in New York City called the River Fund that is they do food relief among many other poverty targeting programs. So this guy, Otto, at the River Fund, he was really inspired by Nourish New York with the idea that he could be spending a dollar for his food bank that would also be helping a New York State farm. So he wanted to launch an in-house line of branded like food staples that would be going out through their food relief program in collaboration with New York State Farm. So this is our pasta that we're launching with him. We're shipping out 6 pallets tomorrow with Headwater. And so this is made with 60% high extraction flour from farmer ground and 40% semolina. And so this will be the kind of like in-house pasta brand for everything that River Fund is doing going forward. So for us, that's, also, kind of a dream to be meeting new people and having these new collaborations where what they're doing and what we're doing typically operated in these very separate worlds, and now kind of meeting of new minds. So that's what we've been working on. I think my day-to-day has been very focused on logistics, and that's the part of the job that I love. And I think with a new program like Nourish New York, a lot of the tricky part was for organization, like the big food banks were already really well set up to do this work. So like Regional Food Bank of Northeastern New York, like sends me a PO for 20 pallets and they can get me a truck there tomorrow. And it's like no big deal for them. But for a lot of smaller organizations, churches, community organizations that were more focused on other parts of their mission, really struggled to figure out the logistics of like, how do I spend this money on good food? How do I store it? How do I distribute it? And Jessica and her team did an amazing job of connecting those organizations with places that they could find food. But a lot of times I found that, as much as they needed pasta, they also needed like weekly deliveries set up and figuring out like, a lot of organizations in New York City, like pallets have to be delivered to the sidewalk and like a team has to be organized in advance to be there to unload the pallets you know, we had an organization in the East Village where like the pallets have to be unloaded instantaneously, like into basement storage. So I think like, you know, this is a common thread through a lot of what people have been talking about, but oftentimes it's those very small logistical details that wind up being the make or break between a good program. So for me, that's been, you know, as an operations manager, like that's, you know, that's what I love doing. But it's been a lot of fun to be able to use those skills to help organizations that really need that support. So I think, you know, for us moving forward, that's part of what we'll invest in too, is figuring out, you know, for us to be a good partner for food relief work is partly about making the pasta, but it's also partly about figuring out what are the delivery mechanisms that are going to make it as easy as possible for these partner organizations who are shouldering the burden of the work. And right now, like transportation is, it's kind of horrible. So like options for low cost transportation that is reliable, like those options are non-existent. So I think, you know, one of the things that I see in this field moving forward is it's a lot about like the next phase is going to be about finding, you know, additional partner businesses in transportation and packaging, where, you know, we've always had those relationships, but not necessarily people who want to figure out, okay, how do we get the cheapest possible, you know, box so I can trim 20 cents off of, you know, my price to food banks, or how do I get pallets delivered to New York City without spending $150, things like that. So those kind of like non-food questions that ultimately impact a lot of the work that we do.
Amazing, Kate. It's so exciting to have everyone here and telling their stories of how they're making these things work. And I'd like to see if anybody, well, first, do any of the panelists have any questions for each other now? But really anybody, if anybody has a question for this assembled team of problem solvers, please ask away.
I definitely have a question. So in general, I mean, there's a few of you that I've just kind of wanted to be like, how did you do that? And what did you do that? And what's the recipe for that? So I think in general, like, is some of that information that you all share, things that you're willing to share more freely? Like I think about even the recipe for the community loaf. Maybe that is something that we can like duplicate, or I've been needing to do a repacking line. So kind of what does that look like for your repacking line and just things like that. So I'm just kind of more interested in the shareability of like the concepts that you got together that work really well and all of that. So.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's an opportunity for me as a writer to do some kind of case studies to lay this stuff out and create the recipes for how all this stuff works. Silas, you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I'm happy to share what we set up on for the small flex repack line.
Okay, I'll come look at it and write it up. That'll happen. And Catherine, are you still here? Did you have to hop off for?
Nope, I'm still here. Am I here?
Yes, you are.
Can you hear me? So a couple of things. Happy to speak more specifically to anyone who wants to understand more operationally how we've set up community loaves. Just feel free to reach out to me. With regards to the formula, that's actually kind of hard because we as a volunteer group, it's one of our sort of secret sauces, something that sort of unites us all. It's free, it's easy to get, but it's part of the volunteer stream in terms of its accessibility. But, you know, it is a riff on Wazoo's approachable loaf. They don't have a porridge or olive oil and honey, and they're using 100% versus a blend of high extraction and whole grain, but it's certainly very close. As is another.
The communal loaf, right? Adrian Hales. Are you thinking of that?
No, we didn't. That wasn't a reference point, although I bet it would have been a delicious reference point. I'm trying to recall when we back in the early days, and it has evolved, I have to say. It's interesting how that it wasn't static despite all the hours and loaves that we made just before launching it out. So absolutely reach out to me, and who knows, as we continue to expand, grow, how some of that might become much more accessible.
Yeah, or maybe maybe we need to make a date for an Illinois or Indianapolis community loaf program happening.
Right.
Yeah,
we are very interested with, it doesn't take long, but it doesn't take much, but it does take some, sort of a dedicated ambassador for the program in your marketplace. Georgia might be one of our next locations, interestingly. And it really is because we can find a cadre of people who are just really enthusiastic to bring it, to their neck of the woods. So
crazy.
Yeah,
that's great.
Right. So definitely let me know if you're one of those.
Other questions? Yeah.
I was just going to say, I have a couple. I have my neighbor loaf recipe, which I'm happy to share, although it's extraordinarily simple because it's just flour and water and salt, but and yeast in some of them. And I do have an oatmeal porridge bread that I sell. I don't use it as a neighbor loaf, but it's probably similar as well, which I'm happy to share with Frash or anyone else. And then I did a little research while we were on this call about, could we do this in Indiana? And from what I understand from my contacts at the food pantry, that we aren't allowed by law in Indiana to take home produced things to a food bank. So for us to think about that, I was brainstorming on the side with somebody I know who is a writer or radio producer now, but used to run the food pantry here. We would have to organize something like through a church or somebody that had a kitchen, and do it in bigger bakes that way with volunteers. Seems like, because have you worked with any of your places do it that way as opposed to in-home kitchens? Do you have resources for that kind of style?
That's to me.
Yes.
Eric. So we just did our very first test bake on our pilot church community kitchen, and we were placing an order for a much larger mixer because to batch this with 6 volunteers, it's still a smaller footprint, and we maxed out at six volunteers in the space and one who we would call floor supervisor. So we will be purchasing not 100 quart or 80 quart mixers like you have, right? But we will invest in perhaps a couple of 20 quart mixers so that we can really optimize the production that day out of that effort. Remember, this is a combined goal of building community, learning bread baking skills while being in service to our neighborhood food banks. So to find the best balance of each of those elements, we don't want to be working with 80 quart mixers because they're not going to go home and do that. Turning them into micro bakeries or, major bread producers isn't part of our goal. But we can do it out of the kitchen, and I'll get back to you on how that continues to evolve. We're writing the manuals up for it right now. And again, it takes a dedicated we have to train the trainer, a model for the floor supervisor who can host the baking session for those bakers.
That's so great to know that's in the works. As you were talking, Catherine, I was thinking of projects that are are similar to, you know, because baking is a generous thing, right?
Right.
This is not a novelty. It wasn't the direness of our situation last year that suddenly made all of this happen. It's there's a reason bread in its expansive, explosive nature is a symbol and an actual feeding thing. But I'm thinking of a bakery in St. Paul, Minnesota. No, it's not a bakery. It's a church in St. Paul that teaches people how to bake ovens. I mean, make ovens, make bread ovens.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have a Saturday bake program, you know, so there's little examples of this all over, and they were, you know, they give away, they'll do a Saturday bake program, and I don't remember if they donate the bread or they raise money and donate that. Johnson and Wales, where Richard Miskovich teaches, he and Mitch Stam from the Bread Bakers Guild of America have led their, they had some regular community baking exercises. So so culinary schools are an obvious place where we can integrate this stuff. And that goes back to the idea of let's get some more culinary training around using local flour so that everything gets more, becomes by rote. No, that's not really what I mean, but you know what I mean. So that this idea is not a novelty, so that people who have the skills are not just familiar with supermarket flours and standard flours.
That is one of the challenges, is again, still getting more access. So I like hearing more about what Silas's Food Hub is doing. The availability of these regional flours at the grocery store. And this goes also for Fresh's comment about, you know, these food deserts. I'm in Cleveland and I've been into 2 different grocery stores, and one that was predominantly brown and I was the minority, and another which was predominantly white and I wasn't the minority, and the food items offered in both of those grocery stores was dramatically different. I don't experience that as much on the West Coast, so it's still eye-opening for me and discouraging. But in scaling this particular effort of community loaves, I do want, we're not packaging flour for all of these bakers across the country. We want them to be able to go into their local store and get freshly milled regional flours that are delicious at a reasonable price point. I have to say that some of these price points have been startling, and maybe they're startling in contrast and they're what they should be, or maybe they are startling because they're taking opportunity of a specific marketplace and they should be a little bit more accessible, but it'll shake out, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd argue that it's probably the logistical twists and turns, the gymnastics that you have to do to get regional flour in a grocery store setting can that makes a balloon of a price, I would think.
Right.
Yeah. But we are almost at a close, and I want to thank everyone who's spoken for coming today and making me smile so much. And I want to invite people who are in this group as an audience, please reach out to me. You have my contact through our schedule thing, and I'm happy to brainstorm more solutions of this nature that we've explored. Thank you, Kate, Catherine, Fresh, Eric, Silas, Jessica, and Mark for sharing your morning with us and helping us imagine more. I really, really am grateful.
I'm so grateful as well from a Maine Grain Alliance standpoint for you guys, for all of you to just be taking the time to out of your day to share all of these great ideas. And I know you're going to get back out of this to go change the world some more for a better place. And I wanted to also add that personally, this gives lots of ideas for the Maine Grain Alliance as ways that we can continue to make an impact in our communities and expand our programs. But I would love if there are resources and or we've talked a lot about recipes or formulations, we're recording this video, so we can add all of those to the webpage that'll be created if people want to send them my way. It's Tristan@maingrainalliance.com, or you can put them in the chat or whatever you'd like. And I'll add those there for the attendees to access, and we'll keep the conversation going that way.
And thank you, Amy, for bringing everyone together for us to learn from the entire panel. This has been amazing and so inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. You know, this was really great. Yeah. Okay, go have some more pancakes, everyone, because I'm starving, Marvin. I don't know about you.
All right.
Let's try a clap now again at the end. Thank you to all the panelists. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. So nice to meet some of you too.
Yeah. Have a good trip back, Catherine.
Thank you, Amy. Nice to meet everybody.